Sir, please, can you just pretend to be my boyfriend in just 7 minutes?
Pretend to be mine for just 7 minutes. It was supposed to be 7 minutes of lies. But when the poor girl's trembling lips met the billionaire's, neither expected to taste something dangerously real. Before we begin, please subscribe, it's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The chandeliers of the Grandeur Hotel ballroom cast prismatic shadows across marble floors worth more than most people's homes. Elizabeth Harper pressed herself against the corridor wall, her second-hand dress, purchased from a thrift store 3 days ago, suddenly feeling like costume jewelry at a diamond convention. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched through the glass doors, a sea of designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, and a kind of casual wealth that made her monthly rent look like pocket change. She shouldn't be here. She knew that. But desperation makes thieves of honest people and liars of the truthful. Miss, do you have your invitation? A security guard's voice cut through her racing thoughts. Elizabeth's fingers trembled as they clutched the small photograph in her coat pocket. Her sister Maggie's face, pale and frightened, looking at the camera with eyes that had lost their hope. 24 hours. That's all she had left before her sister's captors made good on their threat. I'm meeting someone, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the string quartet playing inside. The guard's expression softened slightly. Name. She opened her mouth, but before any sound could escape, the ballroom doors swung open, and the entire trajectory of her life shifted on its axis. Wilson Johnson emerged like a force of nature contained in a 6'2" frame. His presence didn't announce itself. It simply was, undeniable as gravity. Dark hair swept back with calculated precision, eyes the color of winter storms, and a jawline that could have been carved by Renaissance masters during their most ambitious moments. But it wasn't his physical appearance that made Elizabeth's breath catch. It was the absolute certainty in his bearing, the posture of a man who'd never encountered a problem his wealth, intelligence, or sheer will couldn't solve. Until tonight, perhaps. Those storm-gray eyes swept past her once, dismissed her, then snapped back with laser focus. For 3 eternal seconds, Wilson Johnson looked at Elizabeth Harper like she was an equation that didn't compute, a variable that didn't belong in his perfectly ordered world. There you are, darling. His voice was smooth whiskey over gravel. I've been looking everywhere for you. Elizabeth's mind went blank. The security guard straightened. The couple exiting behind Wilson, dripping in wealth and judgment, paused their conversation. And Wilson Johnson, Forbes' third richest man under 40, architect of the Johnson empire that spanned 3 continents, extended his hand toward a girl who'd eaten instant ramen for dinner 6 nights this week. She should have run. Should have apologized for the misunderstanding and fled into the night. Instead, Elizabeth Harper, 26-year-old bookstore clerk with $47 in her checking account and a sister's life hanging by a thread, made the most reckless decision of her existence. She took his hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm but not constraining. He pulled her forward with the confidence of a man orchestrating a business acquisition, steering her past the security guard and into the ballroom with such natural authority that no one thought to question it. Play along, he murmured, his lips barely moving, his smile never faltering as he nodded to a passing couple. I'll explain later. I need. Elizabeth started. Not here. His hand shifted to the small of her back, proprietary and protective simultaneously. Smile. We are being watched. And they were. Elizabeth felt the weight of 100 curious gazes as Wilson guided her deeper into a world she'd only glimpsed through magazine pages and movie screens. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light. Diamonds competed with the chandeliers for brilliance. Conversations flowed in that particular cadence of the wealthy, every word carefully chosen, every laugh strategically deployed. Wilson, darling. A woman in scarlet silk materialized before them, her smile sharp as a blade. You didn't mention you were bringing someone tonight. Victoria. Wilson's greeting held the warmth of a corporate shareholder meeting. May I introduce? Elizabeth. The name escaped her lips before she could stop it, her only truth in a moment built on deception. Elizabeth Harper. Victoria's eyes, calculating and cold, swept over Elizabeth's dress, her shoes, her simple jewelry. The assessment took 3 seconds and found her wanting. Charming. And how did you two meet? Wilson's fingers pressed gently against Elizabeth's back, a warning or encouragement, she couldn't tell. Her mind raced. The truth was impossible. A lie seemed inevitable. But then she looked up at this man who'd saved her from security for reasons she didn't understand, at his expression of casual confidence that suggested he'd never failed at anything in his entire privileged life, and something in her snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far, too long. Actually, Elizabeth heard herself say, I need to borrow him. For exactly 7 minutes. The background noise of the party seemed to dim. Victoria's eyebrows rose toward her professionally lifted hairline. And Wilson Johnson, master of boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, looked at Elizabeth with something that might have been surprise if his face were capable of such pedestrian expressions. Excuse me. His tone held curiosity, not offense. Elizabeth's desperation crystallized into reckless courage. She'd come here tonight prepared to crash this party, to throw herself at the mercy of the most powerful person she could find, to beg for help she had no right to ask for. She had nothing to lose except the one person who mattered more than her pride, her dignity, or her safety. 7 minutes of your time, Mr. Johnson. Her voice steadied, strengthened by the kind of clarity that only comes from standing on the edge of an abyss. Pretend to be mine for 7 minutes. Just 7. Then I'll disappear, and you'll never see me again. Elizabeth. His tone held warning now. Please. She met his eyes, and in that moment, she let him see everything. The fear, the desperation, the fierce love that had driven her to this impossible place. I'm not crazy. I'm not dangerous. I'm just someone who needs help, and you're the only person in this room who looked at me like I was real. Silence stretched between them while the party continued its choreographed dance around their strange tableau. Victoria watched with the fascinated expression of someone witnessing a social disaster in real time. Other guests began to notice the pause in conversation, the unusual intensity of the exchange. Wilson's expression remained unreadable, but Elizabeth saw something flicker in those grey eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or the recognition of another chess player brave enough or foolish enough to make an unexpected move. 7 minutes, he said finally. The balcony. 5 minutes from now. Come alone. Then he turned to Victoria with a smile that could have graced corporate brochures, made some smooth comment about business calls, and disappeared into the crowd with the ease of a man who owned every room he entered. Elizabeth stood frozen, her heart performing gymnastics in her chest. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd gotten Wilson Johnson's attention. Now she just had to figure out how to ask a complete stranger to pay $3 million to save her sister's life. 5 minutes had never seemed so long or so short. Elizabeth counted seconds like heartbeats, each one hammering against her ribs as she navigated through clusters of people who inhabited a world she'd never belonged to. The French doors leading to the balcony seemed miles away, though they couldn't have been more than 50 feet. She passed conversations about summer homes in the Hamptons, about mergers and acquisitions, about problems money could solve as easily as signing a check. If only her problem were so simple. The October night air hit her like a confession when she finally stepped outside. The balcony overlooked Central Park, its sprawling darkness interrupted by pathways of light that looked like golden veins from this height. In the distance, Manhattan's skyline pierced the darkness, a testament to ambition, wealth, and the dreams of people who believed anything was possible with enough determination. Elizabeth had never felt less determined in her life. She felt terrified. You have my attention. Wilson's voice came from the shadows near the balustrade. He'd removed his jacket, rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows in a gesture that should have made him seem more casual but somehow only emphasized the controlled power in his frame. A whiskey glass dangled from his fingers, catching the light from the ballroom. I'm curious what kind of desperation brings a girl to a charity gala she wasn't invited to, makes her accept help from a stranger, and then demands 7 minutes of his time like she's negotiating a business deal. Elizabeth's prepared speech evaporated. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in the cab ride over, in the elevator up, in the terrible seconds before she'd gathered courage to enter the building. But all her carefully chosen words scattered like dandelion seeds in the wind of his direct attention. My sister is going to die if I don't pay $3 million by tomorrow night. The truth landed between them like a gunshot. Wilson's expression didn't change, but Elizabeth saw his fingers tighten imperceptibly around his glass. Is this a kidnapping? Yes. Have you contacted the police? They said if I involve authorities, they'll kill her immediately. Elizabeth's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. They've already sent proof they're serious. A video of her. They hurt her, Mr. Johnson. They hurt my little sister to show me they're not bluffing. Wilson set his glass down on the balustrade with careful precision. Why me? Why not go to the FBI, to professional negotiators, to people trained for? Because I've already been to the police, who told me $3 million is beyond their resources for what they called a potential hoax. Because professional negotiators need money, I don't have to even start negotiations. Because the FBI wants evidence I can't provide without putting Maggie at greater risk. Elizabeth's hands clenched at her sides. I came here tonight because this party is full of people for whom $3 million is a rounding error on their investment portfolios. I came here thinking I could find someone, anyone, whom I help. And when that security guard was about to throw me out, you claimed me. You looked at me like I mattered. So I'm asking you, no, I'm begging you, please help me save my sister. You understand what you're asking? $3 million to a complete stranger based on a story I have no way to verify. Wilson's tone wasn't cruel, just businesslike. I admire your courage, Miss Harper, but I didn't build an empire by making emotional investments in unvetted propositions. I'll pay you back. The words tumbled out desperately. Every penny. With interest. I'll sign whatever contract you want. I'll work for you, You work at a bookstore. It wasn't a question. Elizabeth's desperation transformed into defiance. You had me investigated in 5 minutes. 4. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Text to my head of security while I was walking here. Elizabeth Harper, 26, employed at Anderson's Books on 72nd Street for 3 years. Degree in English Literature from Columbia. Full scholarship. Sister Margaret Harper, 22, second-year medical student at Cornell. Parents deceased in a car accident 4 years ago. Clean credit, no criminal record, spotless except for one parking ticket you disputed and won. He paused. You're nobody's fool, Miss Harper. Which makes this entire situation fascinating. I'm not here to fascinate you, Elizabeth shot back, her fear momentarily overridden by anger. I'm here because my sister was grabbed off the street 3 days ago by men who knew exactly who she was, exactly what she meant to me, and exactly how much they could extort. They want $3 million transferred to an offshore account by 9 p.m. tomorrow, or they'll kill her and dump her body where I'll never find it. So no, Mr. Johnson, I don't have time to be fascinating. I need help. Wilson studied her in the silence that followed, and Elizabeth forced herself to hold his gaze even though everything in her wanted to look away. She'd read about Wilson Johnson in Forbes, in Business Weekly, in those puff pieces that called him the Ice King of Wall Street. They said he was brilliant, a chess player who could see 12 moves ahead. They said he was ruthless, willing to make decisions that would keep other men awake at night. They said he was impossible to manipulate because he understood human nature too well to fall for emotional appeals. They never said he was kind. If I give you $3 million, Wilson said slowly, what guarantee do I have that it's not a scam? That you're not working with these supposed kidnappers to exploit my momentary interest in your situation? The accusation should have hurt, but Elizabeth was too exhausted for offense. None. You have no guarantee. Just like I have no guarantee you won't walk back into that party and forget this conversation ever happened. We are both taking risks here, Mr. Johnson. Mine just happens to be my sister's life. Show me proof. What? You said they sent proof. Show me. Elizabeth's hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. Part of her didn't want to share the video, didn't want to make Maggie's terror real by showing it to someone else. But she'd come too far for pride. She opened the file and held the phone toward Wilson. The video lasted 43 seconds. It showed Maggie, beautiful, brilliant Maggie who wanted to be a surgeon, who volunteered at free clinics, who'd never hurt anyone in her entire life, bound to a chair in a windowless room. Her face was bruised. Dried blood crusted one nostril. When she spoke, her voice shook so badly that Elizabeth had memorized every syllable trying to decode hidden messages that weren't there. Lizzie, they're serious. Please, do whatever they ask. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to find me. Just pay them. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Then the camera panned to show a man's gloved hand holding today's newspaper next to Maggie's face. Proof of life, proof of timeline. The video ended. Wilson watched it twice, his expression unreadable. When he handed the phone back, Elizabeth saw something she hadn't expected in his eyes. Not pity, but calculation. The newspaper is legitimate. I can see the headline about the UN summit. The timestamp is current. The room has no identifying features, which suggests either professionals or smart amateurs. He spoke like he was analyzing a business deal. The accent of the man speaking in the background. Did you catch it? Eastern European, maybe. I'm not good with. Russian. Chechen, specifically. Small detail in the pronunciation. Wilson pulled out his own phone. The offshore account they specified. What bank? Elizabeth rattled off the information from memory, watching as Wilson's fingers flew across his screen. His face remained carefully neutral, but she saw the minute tightening around his eyes that suggested he'd found something significant. Mr. Johnson. This account has been used before, twice in the past 18 months, both times for ransoms in the 5 to 7 million range. Both victims were recovered alive after payment. He looked up from his phone. Both were also immediately put into witness protection because the kidnappers were connected to a larger trafficking operation out of Brighton Beach. Hope and horror warred in Elizabeth's chest. So you believe me? I believe your sister is in genuine danger. I believe these people are professionals. And I believe that paying them is likely the only way to get her back alive. Wilson pocketed his phone. I also believe that the moment you transfer that money, you become a liability they'll want to eliminate. The balcony tilted slightly. Elizabeth grabbed the balustrade for support. But they said. They lied. They always lie. Wilson's tone remained matter-of-fact, like he was explaining market fluctuations. You pay the ransom, they release your sister, then they have two witnesses who can identify them, their methods, and their money trail. The FBI will be involved the moment she's free, and they can't risk that exposure. Then what do I do? Elizabeth heard the despair in her own voice. If paying gets us both killed, and not paying gets Maggie killed, what choice do I have? You pay them, Wilson said, but not alone, and not according to their timeline. I don't understand. Wilson leaned back against the balustrade, and for the first time, Elizabeth saw something other than cold calculation in his expression, a spark of what might have been anger, or perhaps recognition of a challenge he couldn't ignore. I'll give you the $3 million, Miss Harper, but not as a loan, as payment for services rendered. Elizabeth's confusion must have shown on her face because Wilson continued before she could speak. The reason I helped you tonight, the reason I claimed you in front of the security guard, wasn't generosity. It was strategy. He gestured toward the ballroom, where the party continued its expensive dance. Do you know what this gala is really about? The Children's Medical Research Foundation is a front for the most elaborate social warfare Manhattan has seen in a decade. My grandmother, Caroline Johnson, is in there right now, along with her mortal enemy Eleanor Ashford. They've been circling each other for 60 years, board positions, charity committees, social standing. And 1 month ago, my grandmother made the catastrophic mistake of betting Eleanor that I would be engaged by Christmas. Elizabeth blinked. I'm sorry, what? My grandmother is dying. Wilson's voice remained even, but Elizabeth caught the thread of something raw beneath the words. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. She won't tell me because she thinks I'll put business on hold to spend time with her, and she'd rather face death than admit she wants her grandson's company. But I know. And I know that her last wish is to see me settled, married, continuing the family legacy she built from nothing. Mr. Johnson, I don't see what. Call me Wilson. And here's what you need to see. Eleanor Ashford knows about the cancer. She made that bet knowing my grandmother is dying, knowing that she's vulnerable, knowing that if I'm not engaged by Christmas, my grandmother will die believing she failed to secure the family's future. Eleanor wants my grandmother to suffer that defeat in her final months. It's social cruelty of the highest order. The pieces click together in Elizabeth's mind with horrible clarity. You want me to pretend to be your fiancé. For 3 months. Until New Year's Day. You'll attend events with me, convince my grandmother, and more importantly, Eleanor Ashford, that we are genuinely in love. You'll move into my penthouse, learn to navigate my world, become Elizabeth Johnson in every way that matters publicly. Wilson's grey eyes locked onto hers. In exchange, I'll pay the ransom for your sister, provide both of you with security until the kidnappers are caught, and give you an additional $2 million when the arrangement ends. $5 million total. 3 months of her life. Pretending to love a man she'd met 30 minutes ago. That's insane, Elizabeth whispered. That's business. I need a solution to my grandmother's happiness and Eleanor's victory. You need $3 million immediately and protection for you and your sister. We both get what we want. What if I can't pull it off? What if your grandmother sees through the lie? Then you'll have tried, and I'll have tried, and we'll both have acted in good faith. The money is yours regardless. I'm not a monster who would hold your sister's life hostage to your performance. Wilson straightened, and the movement reminded Elizabeth of a blade being drawn from its sheath. But I think you'll pull it off beautifully. You're scared and desperate, but you're not stupid. And desperation, Miss Harper, is the most powerful motivator I know. Elizabeth's mind spun through possibilities, consequences, dangers she couldn't even name. This man was offering her everything she needed wrapped in a bargain that felt like selling her soul. But what was a soul worth against Maggie's life? Why me? She asked. You could hire an actress, find a professional who knows how to. Because you're real. Wilson's interruption was gentle but firm. Every woman in that ballroom would kill for a chance to be on my arm, which means every single one of them would perform the role too perfectly. But you walked in here ready to beg a stranger for help because you love your sister more than your pride. That kind of authenticity can't be faked, and my grandmother will recognize it instantly. She spent 60 years spotting social climbers and phonies. You're neither. I'm an imposter asking to be a different kind of imposter. No. You're a desperate woman making a calculated trade. There's a difference. Wilson pulled a business card from his pocket and a pen. He scrawled something on the back and handed it to her. This is my personal cell number. Text me the account information for the ransom. I'll have the money transferred within the hour. My security team will coordinate with you tomorrow to ensure the exchange happens safely. Elizabeth took the card with numb fingers. Just like that. Just like that. But Miss Harper, Elizabeth, understand this clearly. The moment you take my money, we have a contract. Verbal, but binding in ways that matter more than signatures. You'll be mine for 3 months. Not in any physical sense, he added quickly, seeing her expression, but in every public way that counts. Your time, your attention, your apparent affection. I don't need love. I need the convincing appearance of it. And after New Year's, you go back to your bookstore if you want. You take your sister and disappear if you prefer. I won't stop you. Our arrangement ends, and we become strangers again. Wilson paused. Or we become friends who shared a beneficial arrangement. I'll leave that choice to you. The balcony doors opened, and Victoria's voice cut through the night. Wilson, darling, your grandmother is asking for you. She wants to meet your mysterious companion. Wilson's expression shifted instantly, from the calculating businessman Elizabeth had been negotiating with to the charming socialite the world expected. He extended his hand to her once more, and Elizabeth understood this was the moment of choosing. Take his hand, and she saved Maggie but lost 3 months of her life to a lie. Refuse, and she walked away with nothing but a phone number and a desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, she'd find another way. Elizabeth thought of Maggie's face in that video. The blood. The terror. the apology for something that wasn't her fault. She took Wilson Johnson's hand for the second time that night. "Let's go meet your grandmother," she said, and sealed her fate with 7 words. Plot twist number 2, the grandmother's test. Caroline Johnson sat in a throne disguised as a wheelchair, positioned near the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows like a queen surveying her kingdom. At 87, she possessed the kind of formidable presence that made grown men fidget and socialites check their appearances. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant twist that probably cost more than Elizabeth's monthly rent, and her eyes, the same stormy grey as Wilson's, missed nothing. Eleanor Ashford stood beside her, a vulture in Valentino, leaning down to whisper something that made Caroline's mouth tighten almost imperceptibly. "Courage," Wilson murmured as they approached, his hand warm against Elizabeth's back. To anyone watching, his touch looked possessive and tender. Only Elizabeth could feel the slight tension in his fingers, a warning or perhaps a shared acknowledgement that they were both about to perform the most important scene of this bizarre arrangement. "Grandmother." Wilson's voice carried that perfect blend of affection and respect. "I'd like you to meet Elizabeth Harper." Caroline's gaze swept over Elizabeth with the precision of an MRI machine. 5 seconds of assessment that felt like an hour. Then, to Elizabeth's surprise, the older woman's stern expression softened into something that might have been approval. "So you're the girl who's captured my grandson's attention." Caroline's voice held the crystalline quality of old money and older wisdom. "Come closer, child. These eyes aren't what they used to be." Elizabeth stepped forward, acutely aware of Eleanor Ashford's scrutiny, of the curious glances from nearby guests, of Wilson's slight nod that somehow communicated both encouragement and warning. She'd spent 3 years helping customers at the bookstore, reading people, anticipating needs, making connections across differences in background and education. She drew on that experience now, meeting Caroline's eyes with genuine respect rather than the deference the woman probably usually received. "Mrs. Johnson, it's an honor to meet you. Wilson has told me so much about you." "Has he?" Caroline's eyebrow arched in a gesture Wilson had clearly inherited. "How curious, since he's mentioned absolutely nothing about you to me. One might think he was hiding something." The challenge hung in the air like a sword suspended by gossamer thread. Elizabeth felt Wilson tense beside her, but something in Caroline's expression, a glimmer of humor, perhaps, or test, made Elizabeth gamble on honesty. "He's been hiding me," Elizabeth admitted. "I asked him to. It's one thing to date Wilson Johnson in private. It's entirely another to become public property the moment people know about us. I wanted to keep something precious just for myself a little longer." The silence that followed felt crystalline, fragile. Then Caroline laughed, a genuine sound of delight that drew attention from across the ballroom. "Oh, I like her." Caroline reached out and took Elizabeth's hand in her cool, papery grasp. "She's got spine, Wilson, and brains enough to know that privacy in our world is a luxury rarer than diamonds. Sit, child. Tell me how you two met." Elizabeth perched on the chair Victoria hastily vacated, hyper-aware of Eleanor Ashford's narrowed eyes, of the cluster of society women suddenly finding reasons to drift closer, of Wilson standing just behind her right shoulder like a lighthouse in human form. The lie came easier than Elizabeth expected. Maybe because it was built on a scaffold of truth. "We met at a bookstore." She glanced back at Wilson, catching his almost imperceptible nod. They hadn't discussed this, but somehow they were improvising in perfect sync. "I work at Anderson's on 72nd Street. Wilson came in looking for a first edition of something obscure. The Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith, Wilson supplied smoothly. 1759 printing, if possible." "You remember," Elizabeth said, and let genuine surprise color her voice because she hadn't expected him to commit so completely to their impromptu story. "I remember everything about that day." Wilson's hand came to rest on her shoulder, the gesture casual but the weight of it significant. "You told me Adam Smith was a better philosopher than economist, and that if I wanted to understand moral frameworks in business, I should read his Wealth of Nations for context instead of treating moral sentiments as an isolated text." "I didn't know who you were," Elizabeth added, which was completely true of their actual meeting tonight. "I just saw someone who clearly loved books and wanted to have a real conversation about them instead of treating them like status symbols." Caroline's eyes glittered with what looked like genuine pleasure. And when did you realize you'd been lecturing one of the most powerful men in New York about economics? When he came back the next week with both books and asked if I'd have coffee with him to discuss them. Elizabeth felt herself falling into the story, building it like a novel in real time. He introduced himself as Wilson. No last name. No credentials. Just a man who wanted to talk about ideas. Very romantic, Eleanor Ashford cut in, her voice honey-sweet and poison-sharp simultaneously, though one wonders how a bookstore clerk caught the attention of someone who could have any woman in Manhattan. The insult was delivered so smoothly that it took Elizabeth a moment to recognize it as an attack. But before she could respond, Caroline's hand tightened around hers. One wonders, Eleanor, why you assume wealth and status are the only currencies that matter to an intelligent man. Caroline's smile never wavered, but her tone could have frosted windows. Though I suppose when one has spent 60 years valuing surfaces over substance, it becomes difficult to recognize genuine quality. The gathering crowd suddenly became very interested in their champagne. Eleanor's face tightened, but years of social warfare had taught her to retreat gracefully when outmaneuvered. Of course, Caroline. I merely meant that Wilson has been quite selective. This must be serious. It is. Wilson's voice carried across the suddenly quiet space with absolute certainty. I'm going to marry her. Elizabeth's heart stopped. They'd agreed to pretend an engagement. That was the deal. But Wilson's delivery wasn't the calculated announcement of a business arrangement. It was a declaration, delivered with such unshakable conviction that Elizabeth almost believed it herself. The reactions rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. Gasps. Whispers. Someone dropped a glass that shattered musically against marble. Caroline's hand trembled in Elizabeth's grasp, and when Elizabeth looked at the older woman, she saw tears gathering in those steel-gray eyes. Wilson, Caroline whispered. Do you mean it? I've never been more certain of anything. He moved to crouch beside his grandmother's wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level in a gesture of such tenderness that Elizabeth felt her throat tighten. I know I've been difficult. I know I've made you worry. But Elizabeth changed everything. She made me remember that there's more to life than quarterly reports and market shares. She made me want something more than building the empire bigger. When? Caroline's voice broke slightly. Christmas Eve. Wilson didn't hesitate. Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. Nothing elaborate. That's not what Elizabeth wants. Just something real. This wasn't part of their deal. They'd agreed to an engagement, not a wedding. Not specific dates and intimate ceremonies and promises that would require even more elaborate deceptions. Elizabeth should have objected, should have pulled Wilson aside and renegotiated their arrangement. Instead, she watched Caroline Johnson cry tears of joy, watched this formidable woman who'd built a dynasty transform into a grandmother simply grateful to see her grandson choose happiness, and Elizabeth couldn't bring herself to shatter that fragile moment. I'm so happy, Caroline said, squeezing both their hands. So very, very happy. Eleanor Ashford disappeared into the crowd without another word, defeat written in the stiff set of her shoulders. Victoria and several other women converged with congratulations that ranged from genuine to venomously jealous. And through it all, Wilson played his role perfectly, attentive, affectionate, every inch the man transformed by love. Only Elizabeth saw the calculation in his eyes when he looked at her. Only she recognized the chess move hidden in his romantic declaration. He'd upped the stakes of their arrangement without consulting her. The question was, why? 2 hours later, after another round of congratulations, after champagne toasts and photographs that would appear in tomorrow's society pages, after Eleanor Ashford's dramatic early departure that everyone agreed was a concession of defeat, Elizabeth finally escaped to the bathroom. She locked herself in the marble and gold sanctuary and braced her hands against the sink, staring at her reflection in the gilt-framed mirror. Her face looked pale, eyes wide with a combination of shock and something that might have been exhilaration. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd convinced one of New York's most formidable women that she was in love with Wilson Johnson. More than that, she'd convinced everyone at that party, including herself for brief, dangerous moments. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Money transferred. $3 million now in the account you specified. My security team will contact you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Be ready. W.J. Elizabeth's hand shook as she read it. He'd kept his word. Maggie would be safe. Whatever elaborate performance she'd just agreed to, whatever additional complications Wilson had introduced with his Christmas Eve wedding announcement, it was worth it. All of it. A second message arrived. Meet me in the coat-check area in 5 minutes. We need to talk about what happens next. Elizabeth took a breath, straightened her borrowed dress, and prepared herself for whatever negotiation was coming. But when she left the bathroom, she found her path blocked by a woman she hadn't met before, early 30s, elegant in understated designer wear, with eye. That assessed Elizabeth with professional precision. Miss Harper. My name is Diana Chen. I'm Wilson's head of security and personal assistant. The woman extended a hand. I'd like to discuss your living arrangements for the next 3 months. Living arrangements. You're engaged to Wilson Johnson now, at least as far as the world knows. That means you'll need to move into his penthouse by tomorrow afternoon. The press will expect photos, social media presence, evidence of cohabitation. Diana's tone was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing a business itinerary rather than Elizabeth's life being completely appended. I've already arranged for movers to pack your current apartment. You'll review and approve everything, of course, but we need to move quickly. I have a job. I have a lease. I have a sabbatical from the bookstore, which Wilson's Foundation will compensate generously. Your lease will be maintained. We are not erasing your life, just pausing it. You can bring whatever you want to the penthouse, including personal items that make you comfortable. Diana's expression softened slightly. I know this is overwhelming, Miss Harper, but Wilson doesn't do anything halfway. If you're going to be his fiancée, you need to live the role completely, or people will ask questions we don't want to answer. And if I refuse, then you'll still get the money for your sister because Wilson honors his agreements. But the engagement will fall apart under scrutiny. His grandmother will be heartbroken in her final months, and Eleanor Ashford will have won. Diana paused. Also, you'll lose the protection my team can provide. Those kidnappers won't just disappear once they get their money, Miss Harper. They'll be watching you, and they'll be wondering if you're worth another $3 million next year. The threat wasn't from Diana. It was from the situation itself. Elizabeth had jumped from one impossible problem into another that was merely complicated. At least complicated had solutions. What time tomorrow? Elizabeth asked quietly. Noon. Wilson's driver will collect you from your apartment. Bring whatever you need for a few days. We'll coordinate the rest of the move afterward. Diana handed Elizabeth a card. My number. Call me if you have questions, concerns, or if anything feels wrong. I work for Wilson, but my job is keeping him safe, which now includes keeping you safe. Why are you helping me? Diana's smile was small but genuine. Because in the 5 years I've worked for Wilson Johnson, I've never seen him make an impulsive decision. He calculates everything, plans every move, anticipates every consequence. But tonight, he saw you, and something changed. Maybe it's still calculation. Maybe his. Playing chess on a level I don't understand yet. But maybe, just maybe, you're the first real thing that's happened to him in a very long time. Either way, that makes you interesting. And worth protecting. Before Elizabeth could respond, Wilson himself appeared around the corner, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his tie loosened just enough to make him look human rather than corporate perfection personified. Diana, thank you. I'll take it from here. His tone was dismissive but not unkind. Diana nodded once and disappeared with the efficiency of someone who knew when her presence was no longer required. Wilson studied Elizabeth for a long moment, and she saw the mask slip, just for a second, revealing something that might have been exhaustion or perhaps uncertainty beneath the confident exterior. You're angry, he said. It wasn't a question. You changed our deal. We agreed to an engagement. You announced a wedding date. I had to. Wilson ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its perfect arrangement. My grandmother is dying faster than anyone knows except me and her oncologist. Christmas Eve gives us something concrete to hold on to. A date, a ceremony, a future she can believe in. Anything vague would make her suspicious. Anything too far away means she might not. He trailed off. Might not live to see it, Elizabeth finished softly. Yes. The word came out rough, unpolished. For the first time since she'd met him, Wilson Johnson looked like a man carrying a weight he couldn't quite balance. I know I should have discussed it with you first. I know I violated our agreement. But when I saw the hope in her eyes, I couldn't. He stopped, regrouped. Consider it part of the contract negotiation. The wedding on Christmas Eve will be real in every public sense. Private ceremony at my grandmother's estate in Connecticut. 50 guests maximum. Tasteful, elegant, brief. And then on New Year's Day, you'll file for annulment citing irreconcilable differences. My grandmother will have had her moment of joy. You'll be free. Everyone gets what they need. Except that I'll have been married to you. Legally married. On paper only. We'll draft a prenuptial agreement that protects both our interests. You'll walk away with your $5 million, your sister's safety, and a marriage that lasted 7 days before being dissolved. It's barely a footnote in your history. Elizabeth wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that marriage, even a fake one, wasn't something she'd ever imagined entering so callously. But she'd also never imagined her sister being kidnapped, or begging strangers for millions of dollars, or standing in a gold-plated bathroom discussing legal strategies with a billionaire she'd known for 3 hours. Life, apparently, was full of surprises. What about after? She asked. After your grandmother? After it's all over. Won't people ask questions about why we split so quickly? We'll say the stress of her death made us realize we rushed into marriage without fully understanding each other. It's painfully common and entirely believable. Wilson's business mask was sliding back into place, transforming vulnerability into strategy. The society pages will have their drama. My grandmother will have died happy. Eleanor will have lost her bet. And you'll disappear back into your normal life with enough money to never worry about emergencies again. You make it sound so simple. The best plans are simple. It's the execution that's complicated. He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. The money transferred successfully 20 minutes ago. My security team has already started tracing the account. We'll coordinate with you tomorrow for the exchange. Diana's good, one of the best. If anyone can get your sister back safely, it's her. Elizabeth looked at the confirmation on his phone, at the number that represented Maggie's life, and felt the reality of their arrangement settle over her like a coat that didn't quite fit. Thank you, she whispered. Whatever else happens, whatever complications come from this, thank you for saving my sister. Wilson's expression softened in a way that made him look younger, almost vulnerable. Thank you for giving my grandmother peace in her final months. That's worth more than $3 million to me. He paused. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow will be intense. The press will find out about our engagement by morning, and your life will change in ways you can't anticipate. Diana will help you navigate it, but it's still going to be overwhelming. More overwhelming than tonight. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Tonight was the audition. Tomorrow the real performance begins. Elizabeth's apartment had never felt smaller than when she returned at 1 a.m, Wilson's driver having deposited her at the curb with instructions to be ready by noon. The single bedroom with its worn furniture and shelves overflowing with books looked like a museum exhibit of a life about to be archived. She should have tried to sleep. Instead, she paced, checked her phone obsessively for updates about Maggie, and tried to process everything that had happened. At 3 a.m, her phone rang. Diana's number. They moved up the timeline, Diana said without preamble. The kidnappers want to make the exchange tomorrow at 2 p.m. instead of evening. They're spooked by something. Maybe they got wind of Wilson's involvement. Maybe they're just being cautious. Can you be ready? Elizabeth's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by sharp fear. What do I need to do? Nothing. My team will handle the exchange. But I need you at Wilson's penthouse by 11 a.m. for briefing. Can you do that? Yes. But Diana, will Maggie be safe? I've handled 14 kidnapping negotiations, Miss Harper. 13 victims recovered alive and healthy. The 14th. Diana paused. We got him back, but he was already dead when they made the exchange. I learned from that mistake. I learned that you never, ever trust kidnappers to play fair. So here's what's going to happen. We are going to pay them their money, and we are going to have 20 agents in position surrounding the exchange point. The moment they release your sister, we move. These people aren't walking away to kidnap someone else's family. That sounds dangerous. Life is dangerous, Miss Harper. This is just more honest about it. Diana's tone softened. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we bring your sister home. The call ended, leaving Elizabeth alone with her thoughts and the photograph of Maggie on her nightstand, taken 2 Christmases ago, before their parents died, when Maggie still believed the world was fundamentally safe and good. Elizabeth picked up the frame, tracing her sister's smile with one finger. I'm coming, Maggie, she whispered to the photograph. Just hold on a little longer. Plot twist number 3, the exchange gone wrong. Wilson's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Tribeca that Elizabeth had walked past 100 times without ever imagining she'd enter. The elevator required a special key just to access his floors. The entry foyer had better art than most museums, and the living room had floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed Manhattan into a living painting of glass, steel, and ambition. Elizabeth barely noticed any of it. Diana met her at the elevator with a tablet and a grim expression. They changed the location again, twice in the past 3 hours. They're making sure we can't set up surveillance. Where? Elizabeth's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Red Hook. Abandoned warehouse district. They want you to make the drop. Me. Elizabeth's stomach lurched. I thought your team was supposed to handle it, yes, but they're specifically demanding you appear in person, alone, with the money in cash. Diana's jaw tightened. It's a trap. They know Wilson's involved now, know he has resources, and they're using you as leverage to ensure we don't try anything. Then I'll go. Elizabeth said it automatically, without thinking, because what choice did she have? The hell you will. Wilson's voice cut across the room. He emerged from what looked like a home office, dressed in dark tactical clothing that made him look less like a CEO and more like someone who'd spent time in places where business suits were liabilities. We're not sending her into a situation where she's obviously bait. Then what do you suggest? Diana challenged. They've been clear. Elizabeth makes the drop alone, or they kill Margaret immediately and disappear. We don't have time for negotiations. We have exactly, Wilson checked his watch, 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's enough time. For what? Elizabeth looked between them, feeling like she was watching a chess match where she didn't understand the rules. Wilson pulled up something on his phone and handed it to Diana. How long to assemble this list? Diana scanned it, her eyebrows rising. 90 minutes if I call in every favor I'm owed. But Wilson, this is necessary. Do it. His tone left no room for argument. Diana nodded once and pulled out her own phone, already dialing as she walked toward another room. Elizabeth stood in the middle of the pristine living room, feeling increasingly like a prop in someone else's production. What was on that list? Equipment, personnel, a backup plan for when their trap inevitably springs. Wilson moved to a concealed panel in the wall and opened it, revealing a safe that required both a keypad code and fingerprint recognition. You're not going in there defenseless, Elizabeth, and you're not going in there truly alone, regardless of what they demanded. I don't understand. Wilson removed something small from a safe, a device that looked like a thin piece of jewelry. This is a tracking chip embedded in what appears to be a simple silver bracelet. Titanium core, GPS accurate to within 3 feet, broadcast signal that can't be jammed by standard equipment. You'll wear this. They'll search me. They'll search you for weapons, for phones, for obvious surveillance equipment. They won't think twice about a piece of jewelry you're clearly wearing for sentimental reasons. He held it out to her. This was my mother's. Died when I was 12. Car accident, same as your parents. If they ask, you can even tell them the truth, that it belongs to someone I lost. That makes it real, which makes them less suspicious. Elizabeth took the bracelet, feeling its weight, its warmth from being in the safe. The gesture felt impossibly intimate, trusting her with something of his mother's, even in the service of deception. "What else?" she asked, because she could see he had more planned. "You'll also ingest a microtransmitter disguised as medication. Tells us your location, your heart rate, and activates if you say a specific phrase." Wilson pulled out what looked like ordinary pain medication. "These are harmless, just ibuprofen in unusual packaging. But one of them has the transmitter. Swallow it with water an hour before the exchange. And if they have equipment that can detect it, then we are no worse off than we would be without it, and they have no reason to suspect you specifically chose to swallow their detection equipment." Wilson's logic was airtight, but Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that she was being prepared for war rather than a simple exchange. "Wilson, what aren't you telling me?" He met her eyes, and for once, his expression was completely transparent. "These people are professionals. That video they sent, the account they're using, the way they've moved the location, it's all textbook human trafficking operation. They're not going to just take the money and release your sister. They're going to try to take you too, double their profit, and disappear before we can react." The fear Elizabeth had been suppressing since 3 a.m. crystallized into something sharp and cold. "So I'm bait." "You're bait that bites back." Wilson closed the safe and faced her fully. "Diana and I have worked together on situations like this before. 5 years ago, my cousin was kidnapped in Singapore. Similar operation, similar demands. We paid the ransom and lost both my cousin and the money. They disappeared into a trafficking network we couldn't penetrate in time." His voice roughened. "We found her 3 months later in Thailand. She was alive, but what they'd done to her." He stopped, visibly composing himself. "We found her because I'd hidden a tracking chip in a necklace she wore. It led us through 6 countries and a dozen handoffs before we recovered her. I learned from that mistake. I learned that you never go into these situations without redundancy. What happened to the people who took her? They're not a problem anymore." Wilson's tone suggested that the details weren't something Elizabeth wanted to know. "The point is, we will get Maggie back. We will get you back. But you need to trust me, and you need to follow the plan exactly." Elizabeth wanted to feel reassured. Instead, she felt like she jumped from one nightmare into another. What if something goes wrong? "Then I improvise. That's what I'm good at." He touched her shoulder, the gesture brief but grounding. "You walked into that ballroom last night ready to beg strangers for help. You took my hand when you could have run. You convinced my grandmother that we are in love despite meeting me 30 minutes before. You're stronger than you realize, Elizabeth Harper. Now you just need to be strong enough to walk into that warehouse, hand over the money, and let us handle the rest." Diana returned, her expression grim but determined. "Team assembled. Equipment en route. We'll have eyes on that warehouse from 4 different angles, plus 2 extraction teams positioned within a 30-second response radius." 30 seconds is a long time, Elizabeth heard herself say. "It's long enough for them to hurt you, but not long enough for them to move you." Diana's bluntness was oddly comforting. "Miss Harper, I need you to understand what you're walking into. These men are dangerous. They will be armed. They will be suspicious. And if they think for 1 second that you're working with us, they will use your sister to control you. Can you keep yourself together when you see Margaret, no matter what condition she's in?" Elizabeth thought of that video, of Maggie's bruised face and terrified eyes. "Yes." "Even if she's hurt worse than before?" "Yes." "Even if they're hurting her while you're there?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, almost angry. "Whatever I need to do to get her out alive, I'll do it. Just tell me the plan." Diana and Wilson exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. Then Diana pulled up a schematic on her tablet. "Here's how this is going to work." The warehouse in Red Hook looked like the kind of place horror movies used for their climactic scenes. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, graffiti that had been painted over with more graffiti until the walls were abstract art of decay. The surrounding area was industrial wasteland, abandoned buildings, empty lots, the kind of neighborhood where people didn't ask questions about unusual activity. Elizabeth sat in the back of an unmarked van 3 blocks away, Wilson beside her, Diana coordinating with her team through an earpiece. The cash, $3 million in non-sequential bills, filled a duffel bag at Elizabeth's feet. The weight of it was both literal and metaphorical. 10 minutes, Diana said, checking her watch. Miss Harper, put on the bracelet. Elizabeth fastened the silver band around her wrist, the metal cool against her skin. She'd already swallowed the transmitter pill an hour ago. Now she was a walking surveillance device, which should have felt safer than it did. Remember, Wilson said quietly, you're scared but not suspicious. You're a sister trying to save her family, nothing more. They'll expect you to be nervous. Use that. Let them see your fear. It makes you seem less dangerous. I am scared, Elizabeth admitted. Good. That'll make it convincing. He handed her a phone, a burner, not her usual one. This has one number programmed in. If anything goes wrong, and I mean anything, you hit the call button. Don't say anything, just let it connect. That's our signal to move in immediately. What if they take it? Then we rely on the bracelet and the transmitter. But try to keep it. Wilson's hand covered hers briefly. You're going to be fine, Elizabeth. This is almost over. She wanted to believe him. But as Diana gave the 5-minute warning, and she picked up the duffel bag and prepared to walk into that warehouse alone, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much worse. Time, Diana said. Miss Harper, you're on. Elizabeth stepped out of the van and into the cold October afternoon. The warehouse was 100 yards away, its loading dock doors hanging open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. She forced herself to walk steadily, the duffel bag heavy in her grip, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone in a 3-block radius could hear it. 50 yards. 30. 20. A figure appeared in the warehouse doorway, masked, wearing tactical clothing, assault rifle held casually but ready. He gestured for her to approach, and Elizabeth complied, her entire body tensed for violence that might come at any moment. Stop there. Russian accent, just like Wilson had identified. Put down the bag. Step back. Elizabeth followed instructions, her hands trembling. Another figure emerged. Check the bag's contents with practiced efficiency. She couldn't see their faces behind the masks, couldn't read their intentions in their body language. Where's my sister? Elizabeth's voice came out stronger than she felt. Inside. You come. Alone. That wasn't the deal. You're supposed to. The rifle lifted slightly, not pointing at her, but the threat was implicit. You want sister? You come. This was the trap Wilson had predicted. If she entered that warehouse, she'd be surrounded, outnumbered, at their mercy. But if she refused, they might kill Maggie right now, and Elizabeth would never forgive herself. She thought of Wilson's words, you're stronger than you realize. She thought of Diana's backup plan, of the teams positioned around the building, of the transmitter broadcasting her location with every step. She thought of Maggie, alone and terrified, waiting for rescue. Elizabeth walked into the warehouse. The interior was worse than the exterior. Dark, cold, smelling of rust and something organic that Elizabeth didn't want to identify. Industrial lights dangled from the ceiling, illuminating circles of concrete floor while leaving everything else in shadow. Perfect ambush territory. Keep walking. The masked man behind her, rifle at her back. Elizabeth moved forward, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, her ears straining for any sound that might tell her where Maggie was. Then she saw her, 20 feet ahead, still bound to a chair in the center of one of those light circles, looking worse than in the video. Blood had crusted on her temple. Her left eye was swollen. But she was alive, and when she saw Elizabeth, her expression transformed from despair to desperate hope. Lizzie. Silence. Another masked figure, this one larger, clearly the leader. He stood beside Maggie's chair, one gloved hand resting almost casually on her shoulder. You bring money. Good. Smart sister. Now we make exchange. Let her go first, Elizabeth said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I gave you the money. Release her. First, you prove you are alone. The leader pulled out a device, some kind of handheld scanner. Take off coat. Empty pockets. We check for surveillance. Elizabeth complied, removing her coat with deliberate slowness, turning out her pockets to show the burner phone and nothing else. The man took the phone, threw it into the shadows with enough force that Elizabeth heard it shatter against concrete. Then he scanned her with the device, which beeped twice near her torso. The transmitter, she realized with sinking dread. What is this? The scanner beeped more insistently. I don't know. Not entirely a lie. I took medication this morning, pain pills. My doctor prescribed them after. The leader made a dismissive gesture. Pills, not electronics. Good. He moved the scanner down her body, pausing briefly at the bracelet. For 3 eternal seconds, Elizabeth was certain he'd found the tracking device. But the scanner didn't react strongly. Wilson had been right about the titanium shielding. Jewelry, the man said. Sentimental. My fiancée's mother. She died. Truth wrapped in deception, just like Wilson had suggested. The man nodded, apparently satisfied, and lowered the scanner. You are clean. Good. Now we finish exchange. He gestured, and the man behind Maggie cut her bonds. She stumbled forward, her legs barely supporting her weight, and Elizabeth rushed to catch her. The moment her arms closed around her sister, feeling Maggie's real, solid weight, smelling the blood and fear but also the familiar scent of her shampoo, Elizabeth felt something in her chest crack with relief. I've got you, she whispered. I've got you, you're safe, we are going home. Lizzie, they're not. Very touching. The leader's voice cut through the moment. Now, one more thing before you leave. Elizabeth looked up, still holding Maggie, and saw what she'd feared from the beginning. 3 more figures emerging from the shadows, surrounding them, rifles raised. The trap was springing exactly as Wilson had predicted. You think we are stupid? The leader's accent grew thicker with anger. You think we don't know about Wilson Johnson? About his security teams? About his history with? He gestured vaguely. Singapore incident. I don't know what you're talking about. Elizabeth kept her voice level even as panic clawed at her throat. Lies. He pulled out a photograph, security camera footage from the gala last night, showing Elizabeth and Wilson together. You are his woman now, which makes you valuable. More valuable than money. He will pay much more to get you back than he paid for this one. He indicated Maggie dismissively. You got your money. We kept our deal. Deals change. The leader gestured, and 2 men moved forward to grab Elizabeth. You will call your Wilson Johnson. You will tell him you and sister need more money for safe return. 10 million this time. If he refuses, we kill sister in front of you. Then we sell you somewhere he will never find you. This was the moment Wilson and Diana had prepared for. This was why she had the bracelet, the transmitter, the backup teams positioned around the building. But $3 million hadn't bought Maggie's freedom. It had bought exactly enough time for these men to reveal their real intentions. Elizabeth tightened her arms around her sister and made a decision that either was brilliance or insanity. She honestly couldn't tell which. No, she said clearly, loudly, her voice echoing in the warehouse space. I won't call him. I won't help you extort more money. And if you hurt my sister, you won't live long enough to regret it. The leader actually laughed. You think you can threaten us? I think. Elizabeth felt the weight of the silver bracelet on her wrist, felt Maggie trembling against her, felt the absolute certainty that Wilson and Diana were listening to every word, that you just told his security team exactly what you're planning. And I think they're about to remind you why kidnapping Wilson Johnson's fiancée was the worst mistake of your very short criminal careers. The leader's expression changed, confusion shifting to realization, shifting to alarm. He gestured frantically at his men. Check her again. Find. The warehouse lights died. In the sudden absolute darkness, Elizabeth dropped to the concrete floor, pulling Maggie down with her, covering her sister's body with her own. She heard shouting in Russian, heard boots on concrete, heard the distinctive thwip sound of suppressed gunfire, not wild spraying but surgical precision. Then lights blazed from multiple directions, tactical flashlights mounted on weapons, and Elizabeth looked up to see Diana's team pouring into the warehouse like a military operation. Which, Elizabeth realized with dizzy clarity, it essentially was. The kidnappers didn't stand a chance. Within 30 seconds, all 5 men were on the ground, disarmed, zip-tied, being read rights in both English and Russian by people who clearly had done this before. Diana herself appeared over Elizabeth and Maggie, her professional mask slipping just enough to show genuine concern. "Are you hurt?" "No. Maggie needs medical." "Paramedics are already here." Diana helped them both up as 2 EMTs rushed forward with a stretcher. "Miss Margaret, these people are going to take care of you. You're safe now." Maggie looked at Elizabeth with eyes that had seen too much, aged a decade in 3 days. "Lizzie, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. They said they'd kill you if I didn't." "Sure. None of this is your fault." Elizabeth squeezed her sister's hand as the paramedics began their assessment. "You're safe. That's all that matters." "Miss Harper." One of the EMTs, a kind-faced woman probably in her 50s. "She's dehydrated, malnourished, and showing signs of physical trauma, but nothing life-threatening. We'll take her to Mount Sinai for full evaluation, but I think she's going to be fine." Fine. Such an inadequate word for what Maggie would face. The nightmares, the trauma, the long road to feeling safe in the world again. But alive. Alive was good enough for now. As they loaded Maggie onto the stretcher, Elizabeth felt arms close around her from behind. Strong, familiar from just last night's brief contact, carrying the scent of expensive cologne mixed with tactical gear. "You did it," Wilson murmured against her hair. "You were perfect." Elizabeth turned in his embrace, saw him dressed in the same dark tactical clothing she glimpsed earlier, his face showing rare open emotion, relief, pride, something that might have been fear if he'd allowed himself to feel it fully. "Your plan worked," she said numbly. "You worked. The plan was just logistics." He pulled back slightly, checking her over with the kind of thorough attention usually reserved for structural assessments. "They didn't hurt you." "No. But Wilson, they knew about Singapore. They knew about your history with." "I know. Diana's already running background checks on everyone involved. We'll figure out how they got that information." His jaw tightened. "But right now, you need to go to the hospital with your sister. Media's going to descend on this within the hour. Hostage rescue involving Wilson Johnson's fiancée is front-page news. We need to control the narrative." The performance. Even now, even after everything, they had to maintain the fiction. "What do we tell them?" Elizabeth asked. "The truth, mostly. Your sister was kidnapped, ransom was paid, my security team coordinated the rescue. You were brave and brilliant. I was terrified of losing you." Wilson brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture tender enough that Elizabeth almost believed it was real. "We'll have our publicist draft a statement. You just focus on Maggie." "Wilson." "Come on, lovebirds," Diana called from near the warehouse entrance. "Ambulance is leaving, and you need to be in it unless you want to explain to reporters why Wilson Johnson's traumatized fiancée is standing around a crime scene." Elizabeth let Wilson guide her to the ambulance, let him help her inside, let him tell the paramedics to take care of them both. As the vehicle pulled away, sirens wailing, she looked back through the rear windows and saw Wilson standing in the warehouse doorway, illuminated by tactical lights and surrounded by Diana's team, looking every inch the powerful man who just executed a perfect rescue operation. She'd known him for less than 24 hours. She'd agreed to pretend to love him for 3 months. And somehow, watching him coordinate with his team, protecting her and Maggie with resources and planning she couldn't begin to comprehend, Elizabeth realized she might not have to pretend as hard as she'd thought. That realization was almost more terrifying than the kidnapping. Mount Sinai Hospital's VIP wing was nicer than Elizabeth's apartment. Private rooms with real artwork, furniture that didn't look medical, windows that actually opened to let in fresh air instead of recirculated antiseptic atmosphere. Maggie had been admitted 6 hours ago, examined by a team of specialists Wilson had apparently summoned with a single phone call, and was now sleeping under medication that would keep the nightmares at bay for at least 1 night. Elizabeth sat in the chair beside her sister's bed, still wearing the clothes from the warehouse exchange, unable to make herself leave even though Maggie was safe, guarded, surrounded by nurses who checked on her every 20 minutes. A soft knock preceded Wilson's entrance. He'd changed into business casual, dark slacks, White shirt with sleeves rolled up, no tie. He looked like he'd just come from a relaxed dinner rather than a hostage rescue operation. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Sleeping. The doctors say she'll recover physically. Emotionally." Elizabeth shrugged helplessly. "They recommend trauma counseling, support groups, maybe medication for anxiety. I've already arranged for Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the best trauma psychologists in the country, to consult on Maggie's case. She'll start sessions as soon as Maggie's ready." Wilson settled into the chair on the opposite side of the bed. I also had Diana coordinate with Cornell to arrange a medical leave of absence. Maggie won't lose her position in the program, and her scholarship will remain intact. Elizabeth looked at him across her sleeping sister. "Why are you doing all this?" "Because it's part of our agreement. I pay $3 million for your sister's ransom, provide security and support until she's safe. I'm honoring that contract." "No." "Why are you really doing this?" Elizabeth leaned forward. "You could have just transferred the money, let Diana handle everything, kept your distance. But you suited up in tactical gear and coordinated the rescue personally. You're arranging therapists and protecting Maggie's education. This is more than a business arrangement, Wilson." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on Maggie's sleeping face. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Elizabeth hadn't heard before. "My cousin, Julia, the one kidnapped in Singapore. She was 23. Brilliant, funny, studying to be a doctor just like your sister. The kidnapping destroyed her. Not physically. We got her back, got her medical care, gave her all the support money could buy. But something broke inside her that we couldn't fix with resources or therapy or time." Wilson's hands clenched slightly. "She completed suicide 2 years after we recovered her. Left a note saying she couldn't live in a world where what happened to her was possible." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Wilson, I'm sorry." "I didn't know." "Nobody knows. We kept it quiet, called it an accidental overdose in the press. Let people remember her as the brilliant girl who survived instead of the traumatized woman who couldn't." His eyes finally met Elizabeth's, and she saw raw pain there, barely contained. "I failed Julia. I got her back alive, but I didn't understand what she needed after. I thought money and doctors and time would heal everything. I was wrong." "So Maggie is." Elizabeth couldn't finish the sentence. A second chance. An opportunity to do it right this time. Wilson stood, moved to the window overlooking Manhattan's glittering nightscape. "I'm not a good person, Elizabeth. I'm ruthless in business, manipulative when necessary, willing to use people to achieve my goals. But Julia's death taught me that some failures can't be corrected with better strategy. Some mistakes haunt you forever." Elizabeth rose and joined him at the window, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You're not responsible for Julia's death." "Yes, I am. I'm responsible for every consequence of my actions, including the ones I didn't anticipate." He turned to face her. "That's why this arrangement with you terrifies me." "What do you mean?" "I'm using you, Elizabeth, manipulating your desperation to solve my own problem, asking you to lie to my dying grandmother, to pretend emotions you don't feel, to become someone you're not. And when it's over, when I've gotten what I need and you disappear back into your normal life, who knows what consequences you'll carry?" Wilson's voice roughened. "What if I break you the way those kidnappers broke Julia? What if the performance I'm demanding costs you pieces of yourself you can't recover?" Elizabeth reached out and took his hand, not the calculated touch of a fake fiancé, but the genuine connection of one wounded person to another. "Wilson, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "I went into that ballroom last night fully aware of what I was risking. I took your deal knowing it required deception. I'm not fragile, and I'm not naive. Whatever consequences come from this arrangement, they're mine to bear. You're not responsible for my choices. But I influenced those choices. I gave you an option you couldn't refuse." "No." "You gave me a solution when I had none. There's a difference." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "Julia's death wasn't your failure, Wilson. It was her kidnapper's crime. You did everything you could to save her, And sometimes that's not enough. That's not weakness. That's just tragedy. Wilson looked at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that shouldn't have felt intimate given their fake engagement but somehow did. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "When I saw you in that corridor last night, I thought you were desperate. I didn't realize you were brave." Desperation and bravery look the same sometimes. No. Desperation makes you grab at any opportunity. Bravery makes you walk into a warehouse full of armed criminals and tell them you won't cooperate. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Diana told me what you said right before we breached, about them not living long enough to regret hurting Maggie. That wasn't desperation. That was you drawing a line and daring them to cross it." Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was terrified." Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do it anyway. Wilson released her hand, but the loss of contact felt significant. "The press conference is tomorrow at 10 a.m. My publicist has drafted a statement, but you should review it. Make sure you're comfortable with what we are saying." Back to business. Back to the arrangement. Elizabeth recognized the shift, the way Wilson retreated into professional distance when emotions got too close to real. "What's the official story?" "That Maggie was kidnapped 3 days ago. That you came to me for help because we'd been dating privately for 2 months. That I mobilized my security team to coordinate with authorities for her rescue. That the experience made us realize life is too short to wait, which is why we decided to get engaged." Wilson pulled out his phone and showed her the draft statement. It's true enough to be believable, vague enough to avoid legal complications. Elizabeth scanned the words that would reshape her public identity. "And after the press conference, you move into the penthouse. We start our performance in earnest." He paused. "My grandmother wants to meet with you privately tomorrow afternoon. She'll want to talk about wedding plans, about our future, about all the things dying grandmothers want to discuss with their grandson's fiancé. Wilson, I don't know if I can lie to her face when she's..." "Then don't lie. Tell her you love me." His voice was matter-of-fact. "You don't have to mean it romantically. You can love me as someone who saved your sister, as someone who's giving you security, as someone who's treating you with respect in an impossible situation. Love has many definitions, Elizabeth. Choose the one that lets you sleep at night." Before she could respond, Maggie stirred in the bed behind them, making a small sound of distress. Elizabeth immediately moved to her sister's side, taking her hand, murmuring reassurances until Maggie settled back into sleep. Wilson watched from the doorway, and something in his expression made Elizabeth's heart ache. "Stay," she said impulsively. "Tonight. In case she wakes up scared. She'll feel safer with both of us here." "Both of us? She doesn't even know me." "She knows you saved her life. That matters more than formal introductions." Elizabeth met his eyes. "Please, Wilson. I don't want to be alone with this." The vulnerability in her admission seemed to break through his professional armor. Wilson nodded once, settled back into the chair he'd occupied earlier, and for the rest of the night, they kept vigil together over Maggie's sleeping formed at a tea some point near dawn. Elizabeth's head found Wilson's shoulder. His arm came around her automatically, protective and warm. Neither acknowledged the intimacy of the gesture, but neither pulled away. When the nurses arrived for morning rounds, they found the three of them like that, 2 sisters recovering from trauma, and the billionaire who decided their safety was worth more than maintaining emotional distance. 3 weeks later, Caroline Johnson's estate in Connecticut looked like something from a fairy tale. Sprawling grounds dusted with November snow. The main house decorated with tasteful holiday arrangements. A chapel on the property that had hosted 3 generations of family weddings. Elizabeth stood in the bride's preparation room, wearing a simple ivory dress that had cost more than 6 months of her bookstore salary, while a team of stylists fussed over details that seemed absurdly unimportant given the circumstances. In 3 hours, she would marry Wilson Johnson in a ceremony attended by 50 carefully selected guests. In 3 weeks, his grandmother would host Christmas at this same estate, surrounded by family, believing her grandson had found happiness. And in 5 weeks, Elizabeth would file for annulment and disappear back into her normal life, $5 million richer and irrevocably changed. "You look beautiful." Maggie's voice came from the doorway. She'd been released from the hospital after 4 days, had started therapy with Dr. Chen, and was slowly regaining the light in her eyes that the kidnapping had dimmed. "I look like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life," Elizabeth corrected, but she smiled. Maggie entered fully, closed the door behind her, and studied her sister with the kind of penetrating attention that came from sharing a lifetime. "Lizzie, are you okay? Really okay? Because you're about to marry a man you barely know, and everyone's acting like this is romantic instead of completely insane." Elizabeth sat on the velvet settee and gestured for Maggie to join her. "I'm fine. This arrangement is giving me security, giving you protection, and giving Wilson's grandmother peace. Everyone wins. Except you're lying to a dying woman about loving her grandson." "Am I?" The question surprised Elizabeth as much as it seemed to surprise Maggie. "I mean, Wilson saved your life. He's been nothing but honorable in this arrangement. He makes me laugh when I don't expect it. He's brilliant and complicated and surprisingly kind when he thinks no one's watching. Is it really a lie to say I care about him?" Maggie's expression softened with understanding. "You're falling for him. Don't be ridiculous. We have a business arrangement. Lizzie, I've watched you two together these past 3 weeks. The way he looks at you when you're not paying attention. The way you unconsciously lean toward him when he enters a room. The way he knew you take your coffee with too much cream before you told him. That's not business. That's something real trying to exist inside your fake engagement." Elizabeth wanted to argue, but the truth was she'd been having similar thoughts. 3 weeks of living in Wilson's penthouse, of eating breakfast together while he read financial reports and she graded essays for the online literature course she'd started teaching. 3 weeks of him asking about her day like he genuinely cared, of her learning to read his moods behind the corporate mask, of small touches that lingered longer than necessary. 3 weeks of pretending to be in love and forgetting to pretend. "It doesn't matter," Elizabeth said finally. "In 5 weeks, this ends. We agreed." "Did you agree? Or did Wilson decide the timeline because he's afraid of what might happen if this becomes real?" Maggie took her sister's hands. "I saw his face when those men had us in that warehouse. I saw how terrified he was, how furious. That wasn't a businessman protecting his investment. That was a man protecting someone he cared about." A knock interrupted them. Diana entered, looking elegant in her bridesmaid dress, her professional demeanor softened by something that might have been approval. "It's time," she said simply. Elizabeth stood, smoothed her dress, and took a breath that felt too shallow. "Lizzie." Maggie rose and hugged her tightly. "Whatever happens today, whatever happens after, thank you. For saving me. For being brave enough to do whatever it took. I love you." "I love you too." Elizabeth held her sister close, then released her and followed Diana toward her fictional wedding that felt increasingly real. The chapel was intimate and beautiful, candlelight, white flowers, classical music played by a string quartet. The 50 guests included Wilson's grandmother in the front row, looking frailer than she had 3 weeks ago but radiating joy. Eleanor Ashford had not been invited, her defeat in their decades-long rivalry complete. Wilson waited at the altar in a tailored tuxedo, and when Elizabeth appeared at the chapel's entrance, his expression transformed into something that stopped her breath. Not the calculated performance she'd expected, but genuine wonder, as if he was seeing her for the first time. She walked down the aisle to him, no father to give her away, just her own choice propelling her forward. When she reached him, Wilson took her hands and leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You're stunning," he whispered, "and I'm terrified." "Of what?" "That I'm going to mean these vows when I say them." Before Elizabeth could respond, the minister began speaking, and they were swept into the ceremony, words about love and commitment and forever that should have felt hollow but somehow didn't. Wilson's voice was steady when he promised to honor and cherish her. Elizabeth's trembled slightly when she vowed to love him in all circumstances, and when the minister declared them husband and wife, when Wilson cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made the guests sigh romantically, Elizabeth forgot entirely that this was supposed to be pretend. The reception was elegant, brief, perfect. Caroline Johnson gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about love that surprises us when we least expect it, about finding joy even in our darkest seasons, about being grateful she'd lived to see her grandson choose happiness. Elizabeth watched Wilson's face during the toast and saw him blinking back tears. This controlled man who never showed weakness, undone by his grandmother's joy, when the reception ended and the guests departed. When it was just Elizabeth and Wilson in the limousine. Heading back to Manhattan, the silence felt heavy with everything they weren't saying. "Thank you," Wilson said finally, "for giving her that moment. She looked happier than I've seen her in years." "It wasn't entirely a performance," Elizabeth admitted. "The part about finding joy in dark seasons. I meant that. These past 3 weeks have been strange and complicated, but they haven't been unhappy." Wilson turned to look at her fully. "Elizabeth, I need to confess something." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "I don't want this to end in 5 weeks. I don't want the annulment or the disappearance or the pretending this never happened." He took her hand, the one now wearing his mother's ring, because he'd insisted on real jewelry for the ceremony. "I want to renegotiate our contract." "To what terms?" "No terms. No timeline. No performance." Wilson's voice roughened with emotion he'd been suppressing. "I want to try being married for real. No guarantees, no pressure, just seeing what this could become if we stop treating it like a business arrangement." Elizabeth felt tears gathering. "Wilson, I don't know if... I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to give us a chance to figure out if what we've been feeling these past 3 weeks is real or just excellent acting." He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles like he had that first night in the hospital. "I'm terrified of failing at this. Terrified of hurting you the way I couldn't protect Julia. But I'm more terrified of letting you walk away in 5 weeks and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. What about your grandmother? When she's gone, people will expect us to grieve together, to continue the marriage. We can't just announce an annulment right after her funeral. Then we don't. We stay married, we figure out our relationship privately, and we let whatever happens happen naturally." Wilson's thumb traced circles on her palm. "Elizabeth Harper, Elizabeth Johnson, will you take the most reckless risk of your life and give us a real chance?" Elizabeth thought about walking into that ballroom 3 weeks ago, desperate and terrified. She thought about taking Wilson's hand without knowing where it would lead. She thought about the warehouse, the hospital vigils, the quiet breakfasts, the moments when pretending had felt more honest than truth. "Yes," she whispered. "But Wilson, if we do this, if we try for real, you need to promise me something." "Anything." "No more hiding behind contracts and arrangements. If this fails, we admit it failed. If it succeeds, we embrace that too. No more pretending." Wilson smiled, genuinely smiled, in a way that transformed his entire face. "No more pretending," he agreed. Then he kissed her in the back of that limousine, and Elizabeth kissed him back, and neither of them was performing anymore. Epilogue. 6 months later, Caroline Johnson passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks after Christmas, surrounded by family, holding her grandson's hand. Her final words were gratitude that she'd seen him happy. The funeral was beautiful and well attended. Eleanor Ashford came and paid her respects with genuine grace, their 60-year rivalry laid to rest alongside its victor. Elizabeth and Wilson grieved together, supported each other through the hard days, and emerged from that darkness still choosing each other. They never filed for annulment. Maggie finished her medical degree and specialized in trauma psychology, determined to help others who'd survived what she had. She moved into an apartment 3 blocks from Wilson and Elizabeth's penthouse, close enough for weekly dinners but far enough for independence. Diana left Wilson's employ to start her own security consulting firm. Wilson was her first investor, and Elizabeth, who'd walked into a charity gala prepared to beg for help, discovered that sometimes the most desperate gambles pay off in ways you never imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Wilson asked one morning, finding her on their penthouse balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over Manhattan. "About how I asked you to pretend to be mine for 7 minutes, Elizabeth said, leaning into his embrace. "And somehow it turned into forever." best 7 minutes of my life, Wilson murmured against her hair. They were longer than 7 minutes.